Imagine a wide plain just before sunrise, when the air is still cool and the sky is a soft blue, grey. The first light touches the grass, the wooden posts of a small homestead, and the gentle movement of a horse shifting in its stall. A thin line of smoke rises from a chimney as a family begins another day in the quiet expanse of the American West. The sounds are simple and steady, the creak of wood settling, the distant call of a bird, and the soft footsteps of someone stepping outside to start the morning chores. It is here, in this open land shaped by long days and steady routines, that families built their homes, raised their children, and hoped for a life that felt secure and predictable, even when the world around them was wide and wild. The families who came to the West often arrived with only a few belongings and a great deal of determination. They travelled across plains and mountains, sometimes for weeks, before reaching a piece of land they hoped would sustain them. When they settled, they began by building small cabins from nearby timber or from sod cut straight out of the earth. These homes were simple, with 1 or 2 rooms, a stove for heat, and a few shelves for tools, dry goods, and the items they carried with them from faraway places. The cabins stood as symbols of the effort it took to turn empty land into a place where a family could live and grow. Each morning followed a pattern that became familiar over time. Parents rose early to light the fire and prepare a small breakfast, often bread, beans or oats. Children woke to the smell of smoke and warm food, rubbing their eyes as they prepared for their tasks. They helped gather kindling, fetch water from a well or creek, and tend to the animals that kept the family fed and supported. Horses needed brushing and feeding, chickens needed tending, and cows needed milking. These chores were not rushed but done with a quiet sense of purpose. The same motions repeated day after day. Life in the West required cooperation, and families depended on one another in a way that felt steady and reliable. Parents taught their children how to do each task, and as the children grew older, they learned how to plant crops, mend fences, patch clothing, and care for younger siblings. The work created a rhythm that shaped each day, moving smoothly from morning chores to midday routines and evening rest. The simplicity of these patterns allowed the days to stretch long and slow, giving the family a sense of order even when weather, sickness, or unexpected events threatened to disrupt it. The landscape around them was both beautiful and demanding. Summers could be hot and dry, making it difficult to keep crops alive. Winters brought long stretches of cold that tested the strength of every home and every person. Families stored food carefully, filling root cellars with potatoes, carrots, and jars of preserved fruits. They dried meat and saved flour for baking. When storms arrived, they stayed close together, listening to the wind press against the walls and trusting their preparations to carry them through until the weather passed. Despite the challenges, the West held a sense of promise that drew people forward. Families believed that if they worked hard and stayed patient, they could create a future that felt stable. They built barns, dug wells, planted orchards, and raised livestock that multiplied over the years. Each season brought new tasks and new chances to strengthen what they had built. Spring meant planting, summer meant tending, autumn meant harvesting, and winter meant repairing tools and preparing for the next cycle. These routines gave shape to time, allowing life to move steadily and predictably. On many homesteads, evenings were the calmest part of the day. As the sun lowered and the sky turned orange and pink, families gathered inside to eat simple meals cooked over a wood stove. The food might have been plain, but the warmth of the fire and the closeness of the family created a sense of peace. After dinner, children listened to stories about the places their parents came from, or tales of the early days of settlement when life was even rougher. Some families read from a small stack of books kept carefully on a shelf, while others played quiet games or sat near the fire mending clothes and repairing tools. The night moved slowly, and the sounds of wind, animals, and the crackling fire eased everyone toward rest. In towns scattered across the West, life followed different but still steady rhythms. Families who lived near trading posts or small main streets often ran shops or worked in local trades. Blacksmiths repaired wagons and tools. General store owners supplied families with flour, sugar, cloth, and simple tools. School teachers guided children through reading, writing, and numbers in small classrooms warmed by a stove. Even in these towns, days were shaped by familiar tasks, from opening the shop in the morning to closing it at sunset. The cycles of work, rest, and family time built a sense of calm routine. Children in both the countryside and the towns learned early how to help their families. They gathered eggs, swept floors, carried water, and fed animals. When they were older, they helped with planting, harvesting, and hauling supplies. They walked long distances to school when weather allowed, carrying slates, small books, and lunches wrapped in cloth. Their days mixed learning with chores, giving them a sense of purpose and belonging. They grew up understanding the land, the seasons, and the patience required for a life built slowly, one task at a time. Families looked out for their neighbors as well. When someone needed help building a new barn or repairing a damaged roof, nearby settlers gathered to lend a hand. These gatherings were steady and communal, turning difficult tasks into shared work that strengthened the bonds between families. At times, neighbors met for simple meals or small gatherings where music, conversation, and laughter filled the evening air. These moments offered a break from long days of labor and reminded families that they were part of something larger than themselves. Travel was slow, and trips to nearby towns were planned carefully. Families loaded wagons with goods to trade or sell, making sure they brought enough supplies for the journey. Roads were rough, and unexpected weather could make travel difficult. When they arrived in town, they visited stores, picked up mail, and caught up on news from other settlers. These visits added variety to their routines, but always ended with the familiar journey home, where the quiet rhythm of daily life waited for them. As the years passed, technology changed life in the West. Railroads brought goods, tools, and new settlers. Windmills helped families draw water more easily. New tools made farming slightly less difficult, yet the pace of rural life remained slow and steady. The land still demanded hard work, and families still depended on cooperation, patience, and daily routines to keep their homes running. The story of raising a family in the Wild West was one of persistence. Parents worked from sunrise to sunset, teaching their children not only how to survive, but how to find comfort in the simple patterns of everyday life. Families marked time through harvests and winters rather than fast, moving events. Even on the hardest days, they stayed focused on the future. They hoped to build a stable home, healthy crops, and children who felt loved and supported. As years slipped into decades, many families saw their land flourish. Orchards grew tall, barns filled with hay, and cabins expanded into larger homes with extra rooms. Children grew into adults who started their own families, often close to the land where they were raised. The early memories of building homes, tending animals, and surviving storms stayed with them, shaping how they approached the world. Their stories echoed through generations, becoming part of the larger history of the West. In the midst of that vast landscape, the quiet routines of daily life continued. Sunrises marked new beginnings, and sunsets signaled time for rest. Families moved through each day with steady motions, from milking cows to cooking meals to sewing patches onto worn clothing. The peaceful predictability of these tasks helped them face the uncertainties that came with the land. The West could be harsh, but within each home, a small circle of comfort grew from shared work and shared hopes. Even now, the memory of how families lived in the West carries a sense of calm. The slow pace, the simple tasks, the wide landscapes, and the steady commitment to building a life all linger in the imagination. The story is long, stretching across countless days and nights, following families as they raised children, tended land, and waited patiently for each new season. It moves gently from one moment to the next, never rushing, never breaking the quiet rhythm that shaped their lives. As more families settled across the plains, small paths formed between homesteads. These paths were made not by machines, but by footsteps, wagon wheels, and the steady movement of neighbors who visited one another when help was needed. A family might walk a mile or more to bring extra milk to a household that had lost a cow, or to give seeds to someone whose first planting had failed. These acts were not dramatic or loud. They were simple, quiet gestures that helped each family survive the hardships of life far from towns and cities. The land was wide, but the connections between families made it feel less lonely. Children growing up in these conditions learned early how important steady work was. They rose before the sun, pulled on simple clothing, and stepped outside into the cool morning air. Even when they were still half asleep, they understood that the animals needed attention. The fields needed care, and the home needed constant tending. But because these tasks were done every day, they became familiar and almost soothing. A child might spend the morning feeding chickens, gathering eggs, and carrying them inside to a parent who was already preparing the morning meal. The day unfolded one calm step at a time. In the afternoons, when the sun rose high and the heat made work slower, families often took short rests. They sat in the shade of a tree or the side of the house, drinking cool water and wiping dust from their faces. Though life was not easy, these moments brought a simple kind of restfulness. Parents talked quietly about what needed to be done next, whether the crops were doing well, or how much food they had stored away. Children listened without worry, used to hearing the daily concerns that shaped life in the West. Nothing felt rushed, because rushing rarely helped anything grow faster or repair itself quicker. Slow, constant effort was the way life moved forward. As evening came, the land changed again. Shadows grew longer, and the air cooled. Families finished their chores, put away tools, and gathered for supper. The sounds of the day faded, replaced by the gentle clatter of plates, the soft hum of quiet conversation, and the steady crackle of the stove or the fire. After the meal, parents often taught children small lessons about the world. They explained how to read the sky for signs of rain, how to mend a torn coat, how to plant rows straight and even. These lessons were passed down from one generation to the next, forming a chain of knowledge that helped each family stay strong. When night settled fully, families prepared for sleep. They lay in beds made of straw and cloth, listening to coyotes calling in the distance or to the sound of wind moving through the grass. These noises were simply part of life on the plains, and after a while they became as steady as a lullaby. Children drifted to sleep easily, tired from the day's work, their minds calm as they thought of the next morning's tasks. Parents stayed awake a little longer, checking that the fire was low, the doors were secure, and everything was ready for another long day. Then they too lay down, trusting that the routines they had built would carry them through whatever came next. During the long summers, families spent much of their time working in the fields. They planted corn, wheat, beans, and other crops that could survive the hot, dry weather. Every plant mattered. Every row was planted with care. The soil was often hard and dusty, and the sun beat down without mercy, but the families knew that only steady effort would bring a good harvest. They watched the skies for signs of rain. They checked the fields for pests. They used whatever tools they had, often old or worn, but still useful when handled with patience. When autumn arrived, the pace of life changed again. Harvest season brought long days, but also a sense of quiet reward. Families gathered crops together, filling wagons with vegetables, grains, and fruit from small orchards. The sound of work filled the fields, steady and calm. Children walked alongside adults, carrying smaller bundles and learning how to judge whether a plant was ready to pick. There was a comfort in knowing that the food they gathered now would help them through the long winter. Every basket filled, every pile stored away, added to a sense of safety and stability. Winter on the plains was often harsh, but families prepared for it with great care. They brought in firewood, mended warm clothing, and reinforced the walls of their homes against cold winds. When snow covered the land, the routines became even quieter. Many tasks moved indoors. Parents repaired tools and made new ones by hand. Children learned to sew simple patches or carve small wooden objects. Meals simmered on the stove for hours, warming the home with both heat and smell. The world outside was still, but inside, life continued with gentle consistency. There were moments during winter when storms rattled the windows and pushed snow high against the doors. Families stayed close then, wrapped in blankets, speaking softly to pass the hours. These storms could last a day or more, but families understood them as part of life. They waited patiently for the wind to calm and the snow to settle. When the storm ended, parents and children worked together to clear paths, check on the animals, and repair any damage. The slow, steady approach to each problem helped the family move through the winter without fear. When spring returned, the land softened and the air grew warmer. Families walked outside and felt the sun on their faces again. They checked the fields to see what had survived the cold. They prepared the ground for another cycle of planting. Spring always brought a quiet sense of new beginnings. Even after hard winters, families found hope in the first green shoots pushing through the soil. The rhythm of life began again, steady and patient, shaped by the seasons that dictated every chore and every moment of rest. As years passed, the land changed in small ways. More fences were built. More homes appeared in the distance. Small schools opened, often in simple one-room buildings with a single stove in the center. Children walked long distances to reach these schools, carrying books tied with string. They learned reading, writing, and numbers, all while helping their families before and after the lessons. The quiet of the classroom felt different from life at home, but it was a welcome part of the day, adding a gentle variety to the steady routines. Towns grew slowly across the west. A general store might open first, followed by a blacksmith shop, then a small post office. Families visited these places when they needed supplies or when they simply wanted to hear the latest news. Even these visits were calm and measured. Travel was slow, and families took care to plan each trip. They loaded wagons with goods to trade, wrapped themselves against dust or cold, and made the steady journey along the simple dirt roads. Nothing moved quickly, and that pace became part of the life that defined the West. Families living far from town found comfort in letters sent by relatives who lived in distant states. These letters took weeks to arrive, but when they did, they were read again and again. They reminded families that though the land was wide, they were not forgotten. Parents sometimes kept these letters folded carefully in boxes or between pages of a family Bible. The paper slowly wore thin from repeated reading, but the words remained steady, a quiet link between the peaceful routines of the West and the memories of lives left behind. Through all these slow years, families stayed focused on their simple goals to raise children, to tend their land, and to create a future built from patience and understanding. Their lives may seem far away now, but the calm rhythm of their days still speaks to anyone who listens. There was no rush, no hurry, only the steady movement of time shaped by work, rest, and the seasons. In this way, the theme of how people raised families in the West slowly becomes clear. They did it through calm routines, shared effort, and a quiet trust in the land that supported them. The calm rhythm of life in the West settled into every part of the land, shaping not only how families worked, but also how they understood time itself. Days were counted not by clocks or rushing schedules, but by the gentle rise of the sun, the slow passing of clouds, and the steady march of chores that returned with each dawn. Parents and children alike learned to move with this rhythm, finding a kind of quiet strength in its predictability. Even when hardships came, the routine guided them, offering a sense of grounding that made each challenge feel a little easier to bear. As families spent more years on their homesteads, their connection to the land deepened. They learned which parts of the soil held the most moisture, where the wind hit the hardest in winter, and which patches warmed first in spring. They planted trees not only to grow fruit, but to create shelter from the wind. Young trees swayed gently in the breeze, and over time their roots grew deep, just like the roots of the families who tended them. These trees stood as markers of each passing season, growing slowly and quietly, mirroring the calm pace of life all around them. Children who grew up in these wide spaces found comfort in simple things. They played in open fields, using sticks as pretend horses or wooden scraps as small wagons. They ran through tall grass, chased each other near streams, and listened to stories told by older siblings while the sun set behind distant hills. Their play was shaped by the land, by weather that shifted slowly, and by the steady example of adults who never rushed their work. Even the smallest child learned, simply by watching, how to move with patience and care. As these children grew older, their responsibilities grew too. A boy might learn how to guide a plough behind a team of horses, keeping the lines straight even when the soil was rough. A girl might learn how to churn butter, mend a shirt, or separate seeds for next year's planting. These lessons were not taught with urgency, but with the calm understanding that time would help each child become skilled. A mistake was not a failure, only a moment to try again, as steady hands and simple repetition made each task feel more natural. Season after season, the land taught its own lessons. Families learned to watch the color of the sky before planting, knowing that a late frost could undo weeks of work. They understood that a sudden storm might wash out a newly built fence or scatter the animals across the open plain. But they also knew that the same land could offer warm days, good soil, and quiet evenings of rest. The balance between hardship and comfort shaped the life of every settler, teaching patience, resilience, and the calm acceptance that not everything could be controlled. When a new family moved into the area, neighbors often gathered to help them start their home. They brought tools, seeds, and advice learned through years of experience. These gatherings had no hurry to them. People worked in steady, practiced motions, lifting beams, securing boards, and clearing the ground for planting. They shared stories as they worked, speaking in quiet tones that slipped easily into the warm air. By the end of the day, the new family had a roof, walls, and a small piece of security in a land that could be both generous and demanding. Holidays and simple celebrations also became part of life. Families gathered at the nearest schoolhouse or church to share meals and talk about the year. Children played simple games, ate fresh bread, and laughed together. Parents talked about crops, weather, and the arrival of new settlers. These gatherings were not loud or festive in the way modern celebrations might be, but they offered warmth, connection, and a brief rest from daily chores. Families returned home afterward with full stomachs and steady hearts, ready to continue their work the next day. Travel remained slow and thoughtful. A trip to town often began before sunrise. Families loaded wagons with items to trade and covered them with cloth to keep dust away. The road stretched long, sometimes winding between hills, sometimes crossing open plains where wind pushed gently against the horses. The journey allowed time for quiet thought, the steady creak of the wagon wheels becoming a kind of gentle rhythm that matched the calm pace of the day. When families reached town, they moved through each task with patience, speaking to storekeepers, collecting mail, and choosing the supplies they needed most. On the return journey, the sun might dip low, casting long shadows across the road. Families sat closer together as the air cooled, listening to the steady footsteps of the horses and the distant calls of birds settling in for the night. These long rides, though simple, became memories that stayed with children far into adulthood. The calm movement across the land, the slow passing of time, and the steady presence of family created a sense of comfort that lasted long after the journey ended. As the years passed, many families expanded their homes. A small room might be added for growing children. A porch might be built to provide shade in summer. The walls that once held the sound of infants now heard the voices of older children learning to read or practicing simple songs. These changes happened slowly, just as everything else did. Boards were added one at a time, nails hammered in with patient strokes, and windows set carefully into place to let in more morning light. Some families kept journals, writing simple notes about each day. A father might record the weather clear, warm, windy, or cold. A mother might note how many jars of fruit were preserved or how many loaves of bread were baked that week. These entries were short and calm, reflecting the steady nature of life on the plains. When the children grew older, they sometimes read these journals, seeing their own childhoods reflected in quiet lines that stretched across the pages. The bond between land and family grew stronger with each passing year. The fields that once looked empty now held crops, animals, and memories. Parents could point to a corner of the property and remember when they first cleared it. Children could look at a fence and recall how they helped build it. Every part of the homestead connected to a moment of work, a season of growth, or a time of waiting. These memories, though simple, created a deep sense of belonging. Neighbors remained important to the rhythm of life. When someone grew ill, nearby families brought broth, bread, and warm blankets. When a barn burned in a lightning storm, neighbors arrived the next day with tools and timber to help rebuild it. These acts were done without rush, without expectation of reward, and without loud praise. They were part of the quiet understanding that life in the West required shared effort. No one family could manage every hardship alone. The land was too wide, the weather too unpredictable, and the tasks too many. When children reached adulthood, many chose to stay near their childhood homes. They built their own small cabins, planted their own fields, and continued the calm rhythms they had known since birth. Others moved farther west, carving new paths to places where the land was still open and quiet. But no matter where they went, they carried with them the lessons of patience, steady work, and the calm movements of daily life that had shaped their earliest years. The story of these families stretches on and on, moving through seasons, years, and generations. Each day blends gently into the next, forming a long, peaceful history of people who sought a place to settle, raise children, and live with quiet determination. Their lives remain a steady echo across time, reminding anyone who listens of the simple strength found in calm routines, shared work, and the slow, patient shaping of a home in the West. The days continued to pass in their gentle rhythm, each one shaped by the same steady tasks that had guided families from the moment they first settled on the open plains. As children grew into young adults, the shape of their world shifted slightly, yet the calm pace remained. They began taking on larger parts of the work, tending to animals on their own, mending tools with practiced hands, and stepping into the rows of fields with a confidence that came only from years of watching, learning, and repeating the same careful motions. Parents watched this growth quietly, proud but without loud celebration. Their pride showed in simple ways a nod of approval when a row of crops was planted straight, a soft word of praise when a young person managed a team of horses without struggle, or a calm smile when a repaired fence stood strong against the morning wind. These moments were not grand, but they were deeply meaningful. They marked the passing of time, the steady shaping of the next generation, and the slow weaving of family history into the land itself. Across the plains, more homesteads appeared as the years passed. Families who arrived later often sought guidance from those who had lived through many seasons already. They walked along the worn paths that connected the scattered homes, carrying small bundles of food or handmade items to exchange for advice. Older settlers offered this help freely, explaining how to watch the sky for storms, where to dig a well, how to protect crops from dry winds, and when to plant so the soil would nourish young shoots before the heat of summer. These conversations took place on porches, by fences, or beside fresh, dug wells. They were unhurried, shaped by a sense of patience that had grown naturally from life on the land. People spoke in simple words, shared stories without embellishment, and passed on wisdom gathered through quiet observation. These exchanges helped new families settle more peacefully into the rhythms of the West, guiding them through their first challenges and giving them the confidence to face the seasons ahead. Even as more people arrived, the land remained wide and open. Silence stretched far beyond the edges of each homestead, broken only by birds calling from distant trees or by the steady turning of windmills that drew water from deep below the ground. This silence did not feel empty. It was calm, steady, and comforting, like the quiet breathing of a sleeping child or the gentle rustling of grass under a passing breeze. Families grew used to this quiet, finding rest in it, letting it fill the spaces between their thoughts. During long summers, the sound of insects filled the air. Grasshoppers clicked through the tall grass, bees moved from flower to flower, and flies buzzed near the livestock. These sounds formed a soft background that followed families through their work. The warmth of the sun, though sometimes harsh, also gave life to the crops that would sustain them. Families learned to pace themselves during the hottest hours, taking slow sips of cool water and resting in the shade of barns or leaning trees. Children often lay in the grass during these moments, watching clouds drift across the bright sky and tracing shapes in their gentle forms. When storms gathered on the horizon, the light would change first. The sky darkened slowly and the wind shifted, bringing the smell of rain long before the first drop fell. Families recognized these signs and moved with calm efficiency, bringing animals into the barn, securing loose boards, covering tools, and gathering anything that might be blown away. There was no panic, only steady preparation born from years of watching the land's moods. Storms came and went, sometimes with strong winds or flashes of lightning, but families stayed safe inside their homes, listening to the steady drumming of rain on wood and sod. Once the storms passed, the world felt fresh and new. The air cooled, the soil softened, and the sky often stretched out in bright colors as the sun returned. Families stepped outside to assess the land and make any needed repairs. Children splashed through small puddles, their laughter carrying across the fields. Parents walked the edges of the property, checking fences and making sure the animals were calm. These after-storm moments were peaceful in their own way, reminding families that even when nature became loud, it always returned to quiet. Winter brought a different kind of calm. Snow covered the plains in soft layers, muting every sound and slowing every movement. Families stayed closer to home, finishing indoor tasks they had set aside during the busy growing season. Mothers mended clothes, darned socks, and prepared warm meals that filled the house with gentle smells. Fathers repaired harnesses, carved handles for tools, and shaped wooden boards for future building. Children played simple games by the stove, their breath warm in the cool one-room homes. On the coldest days, frost formed on the inside of the windows, creating delicate patterns that shimmered in the weak daylight. Families scraped the frost away with steady hands, letting in whatever sunlight they could. Even these small moments held a quiet beauty. The world outside might be harsh, but inside, the warmth of the fire and the presence of family created a deep sense of peace. Sometimes, winter nights stretched long, and the only light came from the soft glow of a lantern. Families sat around the table, reading from well-worn books or telling stories passed down from older generations. These stories were simple, often about journeys, family history, or small memories of life before the West. The words drifted through the room at a slow, even pace, matching the quiet crackle of the fire. For children, these stories often became some of their most cherished memories. They connected them to a past they had never seen and to the long line of family that had shaped the present. As the years continued, small towns grew into larger settlements. More buildings rose along the dusty streets, general stores, workshops, blacksmiths, and sometimes a doctor's small office. Families visited these places when needed, though the rhythm of their homestead life remained unchanged. A trip to town was still an all-day affair, planned carefully and taken with patience. Wagons moved at their steady pace, wheels turning across familiar paths marked by time and use. In these growing towns, families found new pieces of community. They attended church services, visited markets, and shared news about the weather, crops, and the passing seasons. Even in these social gatherings, the calm tone of the West remained. People spoke slowly, listened fully, and moved with the same steady pace they had learned from the land. There was no rush, for rushing rarely changed anything in a place shaped by nature and time. Schools in these towns or along the plains continued to bring children together. The sound of lessons drifted through open windows, mixing with the breeze. Children sat at wooden desks, writing with simple pencils and reading from shared books. Learning came in slow, steady steps, much like the work at home. Teachers understood the demands of farm life and shaped lessons to match the pace of the seasons, giving more indoor work in winter and allowing children to help their families during harvest time. As children grew into adults, the calm routines of the West shaped their hearts and minds. They understood that every task mattered, whether planting seeds, repairing fences, caring for animals, or keeping the home warm. Each action connected to a larger purpose, building a life of stability and quiet strength. These young adults carried these lessons into their own families, continuing the slow, steady work of making a home on the plains. Generations passed in this way. The land changed as more fields were sown and more homes were built, yet the calm rhythm remained. Families came and went, but the steady routines that shaped their lives stayed constant. The West became a place not only of open land and distant horizons, but of deep roots, quiet traditions, and peaceful days shaped by simple tasks and shared effort. This long story of family life in the West stretches far into the memory of anyone who listens. It moves gently from one moment to the next, never rushing, always carrying the same soft tone of calm, steady living. And in this quiet story, the heart of the West continues to live, as peaceful and patient as the wide plains themselves. Days came and went with movements so familiar that families could follow them even when tired, even when the world outside shifted from warm sun to deep winter cold. The steady rhythm was the thread that held their lives together, and as the months rolled on, that rhythm shaped every choice they made, every hope they carried, and every memory that settled quietly into the years they spent on the frontier. Families woke each morning not to chase anything new, but to continue what had been started the day before. A father might rise before light and sit at the edge of the bed for a moment, listening to the faint sounds of wind touching the walls. He would dress by the dim glow of embers left from the night's fire, then push open the door and walk out into the early chill. He checked the animals first, because their health meant food, strength for work, and a sense of security. The cattle had to be counted. The horses had to be brushed, fed, and watered. If there were chickens, he looked for signs of foxes. If there were pigs, he made sure the pen was firm so they could not wander into the fields. Inside the home, the mother stirred from sleep a little later, warming herself near the stove, adding wood to bring back the heat. She moved through the kitchen in a quiet, practiced way, taking flour from a sack, water from a tin cup, and shaping the dough for the day's bread. Sometimes she saved small pieces of dough to fry for the children, giving them a warm treat before they began their chores. She checked the small supplies of dried beans, onions, or salted meat to decide what the next meal would be. Everything had to be used with care, because stores were difficult to replace and every item had been earned through long, steady work. Children rose when they smelled breakfast or heard their parents moving around. They dressed in simple clothes that had been patched again and again, not for appearance but for usefulness. The girls helped sweep the floor, carry wood, and wash dishes. The boys carried water, fed smaller animals, checked the fence, and helped with repairs that were never finished. Every day brought something that needed fixing: a loose hinge, a broken tool handle, a worn rope. These tasks taught children not only useful skills but also patience, because nothing in the West lasted forever, and everything needed careful attention. As the sun climbed higher, the family stepped into their real work. Planting, harvesting, weeding, and tending the fields were tasks that shaped most of the year. In spring, the ground had to be turned and seed placed carefully in rows so the plants would grow straight and strong. Summer meant hours spent under a hard sun, pulling weeds, guiding water through small ditches, and protecting crops from insects or wandering animals. Autumn brought long days of gathering, storing, drying, and packing food, so it would last through winter. Winter itself was quieter but never empty. Snow made travel difficult, so families stayed close to home, mending clothes, tending animals, cutting firewood, and preparing what they could for the next season. Through all of this, families lived with a sense of calm determination. They knew that some years the harvest would be small, some storms would be stronger than expected, and some days would bring setbacks, but they also knew that the land rewarded slow, steady effort. When families worked with patience, they could build a life that felt solid. They could look at a growing crop or a well-built barn and feel the comfort of progress made one piece at a time. Children grew up inside this rhythm, learning from every movement their parents made. They learned how to ride horses at an early age, not for fun, but to move cattle or reach distant parts of the land. They learned to read weather by watching the sky. They learned to cook simple meals, sew worn clothing, and use tools with care. These lessons were passed down not in long talks, but in small actions repeated day after day. A child learned to tie knots because a father showed how to loop the rope around a beam. A child learned to make butter because a mother guided small hands around the churn. Knowledge settled slowly into their lives, becoming part of who they were. Communities formed over time, even though homes were often far apart. When neighbors visited, it was not usually for celebration but for help. Families worked together to raise barns, repair fences, build bridges, or gather at harvest time when many hands made the work lighter. These shared tasks created bonds stronger than words, because each family understood the quiet struggle of the others. They knew what it meant to rely on weather, soil, and hard work. They knew the weight of raising children in a place where comfort was earned, not given. Despite the distance between homes, families found ways to create moments of peace and togetherness. On long winter nights, they gathered near the fire, listening to stories of earlier days. Some stories came from the east, where many families had lived before traveling west. Others came from the trail, from long journeys in wagons or on horseback. These stories helped children understand where their parents came from and why they had chosen a life on the frontier. They created a sense of roots, even in a place where everything felt new. Holidays were simple but meaningful. A small feast on a winter night, a shared pie baked from the last apples of the season, or a gathering of neighbors who brought whatever they could spare. All of these moments reminded families that life was more than work. Music sometimes filled the rooms when someone brought a fiddle or harmonica. Children danced in small steps across wooden floors, their laughter mixing with the soft glow of lamplight. These were not grand celebrations, but they brought warmth to the heart of a hard life. School was important when families could manage it. Many children walked miles to small schoolhouses where one teacher taught students of all ages. Lessons were simple reading, writing, and arithmetic. Books were shared. Chalk was precious. But learning gave children tools that could help them understand the growing towns, the changing world, and the responsibilities they would inherit. Some families could not spare the time for school during planting or harvest, so children learned when the land allowed it. Even when school was not possible, parents taught what they could at home, ensuring that children could read the Bible, a newspaper, or letters from relatives far away. Mail was a quiet treasure. Letters arrived only once in a while, but families cherished every word. A letter from a relative in the east or a friend in another settlement brought news, comfort, or simple connection. Families read these letters again and again, passing them around the table. The words reminded them that they were not alone, even if the nearest town was many miles away. Travel was rare but necessary. Families visited towns to buy supplies, sell crops, trade goods, or have tools repaired. These trips were long and often difficult, but they offered a glimpse of a world beyond the homestead. Children looked with wide eyes at blacksmith shops, general stores, and wagons filled with goods. Towns were small at first, with only a few buildings, but as more settlers arrived, new shops, schools, and churches sprang up. Families watched the town grow over the years, feeling a sense of connection to its steady rise. Church played a strong role in many communities. Families gathered on Sundays in small wooden buildings, sometimes only a room with benches. The service brought people together, giving them a shared space for reflection and quiet fellowship. Children sat beside their parents, listening to sermons about patience, kindness, and the strength needed to live in a challenging land. Church gatherings also gave families a chance to talk, share news, and strengthen the bonds that carried them through hard seasons. As the years passed, families watched their children grow into adults who understood the land as well as their parents did. Sons learned how to plow straight furrows, manage livestock, build fences, and read the sky for signs of storms. Daughters learned how to prepare meals from modest supplies, care for younger siblings, manage the house, and handle the steady work that shaped each day. When young adults married, they often settled near their families, building new homes not too far from the old ones. Generations grew side by side, connected by shared struggles and shared hopes. The land changed slowly, but it changed. More settlers came. Railroads stretched across plains, linking towns and carrying goods that once took weeks to reach. New tools appeared, making some tasks lighter. Communities grew into towns with small shops, post offices, schools, and meeting halls. But even as the West changed, the quiet rhythm of family life stayed the same. Work still began at dawn. Meals were still prepared from food gathered by the family's own hands. Children still learned chores from watching their parents. The world around them expanded, but the heart of their days remained steady. Hard years came as well. Droughts dried the land. Winters brought deep snow. Insects destroyed crops. Families faced these hardships with calm resolve, knowing that the only way forward was through patience and steady effort. Some families moved on when land became too difficult to farm. Others stayed, rebuilding again and again with the same quiet strength that had brought them west in the first place. Through everything, families found meaning in the simple routines that held their days together. A father leading a horse across a field. A mother setting a pot on the stove. Children running toward the barn to check on new calves. The sound of a windmill turning slowly in the afternoon breeze. These small moments created a sense of stability that did not depend on wealth or ease, but on the gentle certainty that each day had purpose. Evenings were peaceful after long hours of work. Families sat together near the stove or on the porch, watching the sky shift from gold to deep blue. They spoke in soft voices or sometimes sat in silence, letting the calm settle around them. Stars filled the sky in numbers that seemed endless, reminding them of how wide the world was and how small their place in it could feel. Yet within that small place, they had built something meaningful. Their homes were simple, their tools worn, their days filled with effort, but they had created a life shaped by steady hands and patient hearts. Many years later, people would look back on the West and imagine scenes of fast action and adventure. But those who lived there every day knew a different story. They knew of quiet mornings, slow years, and patient work. They knew that raising families in the West was not about excitement, but about endurance, care, and the calm strength to face each new season with steady purpose. And so their story continues across time, carried through memories, diaries, and the land itself. It moves at a slow, even pace, just as their days once did. It shows how families built homes, raised children, tended soil, and shaped a life in a place that offered both challenge and peace. Their lives form a long, gentle story, a story of simple routines, quiet hopes, and the steady work of building a future in the West, one calm day at a time. Seasons continued to move with a quiet certainty, bringing subtle changes that shaped every aspect of life on the frontier. Spring arrived gradually, with soft rains soaking the soil and new green shoots breaking through the earth. Families watched carefully, noticing which plants emerged first, which parts of the field were still too cold for sowing, and where the frost had touched the edges of young crops. This attention to detail was not a hurried process, but a calm observation, part of the rhythm that had guided settlers for years. Children followed their parents' movements, learning to read the land in small, patient steps. They noted the angles of sunlight, the patterns of wind, and even the behavior of animals that grazed or nested nearby. All of these quiet lessons became part of their understanding of the world. The planting season was busy, but it moved at a steady pace. Fathers guided oxen or horses through long rows, turning the soil carefully so seeds would take root. Mothers and older children worked alongside, planting vegetables, checking irrigation ditches, and ensuring that young sprouts were safe from insects or small wildlife. The work could be tiring, but the repetition and steady routine brought comfort. Every action was meaningful. Every row planted represented not just food for the table, but security, stability, and the continuation of life through the family. Evenings during planting season were often calm and reflective. After long hours in the fields, families returned home with tired bodies but steady hearts. The smell of fresh bread, hot stew, or warming milk greeted them. Children rested while mothers and fathers completed a few smaller chores, mending tools, patching worn clothes, or making small repairs around the homestead. The day ended not with rush or urgency, but with the steady closing of doors, the soft glow of lamps, and the quiet conversation that drifted slowly into night. Summer followed with longer days and the warmth of the sun pressing on the land. Work extended from morning to evening, as fields required constant attention. Weeding, watering, and tending crops became central tasks. Livestock needed more water and space, so families moved with them across pastures, ensuring that each animal remained healthy. Children learned to carry water in buckets, guide animals, and watch for signs of illness or distress. These tasks were demanding, yet they were not chaotic. Each movement had purpose, each day followed a pattern, and the rhythm of work gave families a sense of calm structure. During the hottest part of the day, families often rested. A simple nap, a drink of cool water, or a few minutes sitting under the shade of a tree allowed the body to recover. The slow pace of these rests was as important as the work itself. Families knew that labor without pause led to mistakes or exhaustion. They understood that patience was a form of efficiency, and that quiet reflection in the midst of a busy day strengthened both mind and body. Children watched their elders and internalized these lessons, learning that calmness was part of strength. Autumn brought change. Crops reached their peak and families shifted to harvest. The pace of life quickened slightly, but it remained steady and controlled. Corn had to be cut and stored, apples picked and pressed into cider, vegetables gathered and preserved. The smell of hay, freshly cut wheat, and drying fruit filled the homestead. Children helped carry baskets, stack produce, and move bundles of crops from field to barn. Their hands grew strong, their movements careful, and their sense of responsibility deepened. Harvest was both work and ritual, a time to acknowledge the passing of months and the quiet rewards of steady effort. As leaves changed color and the air grew cooler, families prepared for winter. Fires were built, wood was stacked, and supplies were checked carefully. Every item had purpose. Food had to last through the long months, when planting or fresh vegetables were impossible. Tools needed sharpening and repair. Clothing required mending and reinforcement. Families moved slowly, methodically, making sure nothing was left unfinished. The repetition of preparation gave the homestead a calm order, even as the outside world shifted toward cold and quiet. Winter arrived gradually, covering fields with soft snow that muted sound and slowed movement. Days were shorter, and families spent more time inside. Children learned indoor skills: sewing, knitting, cooking, and reading. Parents worked with care on tools, furniture, and repairs. Livestock still needed attention, but the pace was slower, allowing families to rest alongside their work. The quiet of winter nights brought reflection, story telling, and simple music when someone played a small instrument. Life became less physically demanding, but it retained the same rhythm and structure that had guided the family all year. During these winters, children often read from books, wrote letters to relatives far away, or practiced skills they had learned. Even leisure time had structure, as families valued quiet focus and deliberate action. The world beyond the homestead seemed distant, yet families felt connected through letters, small visits, or occasional trips to town. These journeys were slow, planned with care, and offered perspective on the wider world. The journey itself became part of the calm rhythm, each mile travelled on dusty roads or snowy tracks, reinforcing patience and steady effort. Years passed, and children grew into adults who carried the same understanding of life that their parents had taught. Sons guided ploughs, cared for animals, and repaired fences. Daughters managed homes, prepared food, and helped with fieldwork when needed. Every day reinforced the lessons of the past: patience, steady work, careful observation, and the quiet rewards of effort. The land remained both teacher and constant presence, offering challenges and sustenance in equal measure. Its vastness reminded families of the smallness of their own struggles, while its fertility rewarded their diligence and care. Some children married and started their own homesteads, building on what they had learned. They settled near their parents or moved farther west, always carrying the calm, deliberate ways of life that had shaped them. These new homesteads followed the same rhythm: dawn to dusk work, seasonal cycles, careful observation of weather, and shared responsibility. Families grew, and over time, generations passed down knowledge, creating continuity in a world that otherwise shifted slowly but inexorably. Neighbors became an extension of family. They helped with planting, harvested crops together, and assisted in times of illness or injury. Social bonds were not extravagant, but they were dependable and steady. When one family faced misfortune, others offered practical help, repairing a barn, lending tools, or sharing food. This quiet, mutual care reinforced the calm and steady rhythm of life, emphasizing resilience over excitement and practicality over show. Education continued, evolving slowly with the growth of towns and schools. Children learned reading, writing, and arithmetic, and they were sometimes introduced to lessons in science or history. Yet their education remained grounded in the land. They observed how seasons affected crops, how animals behaved, and how weather shifted unexpectedly. They learned that knowledge and patience together allowed them to thrive. Learning was never separate from living. It was intertwined with daily work and the slow accumulation of experience. Holidays, religious services, and town gatherings marked time as gently as the seasons. Families attended church, shared meals, or traveled short distances to visit friends. These events were calm, measured, and quiet, emphasizing reflection and connection rather than spectacle. Children absorbed the importance of community and shared effort, witnessing the ways people could cooperate and care for one another. Even these social experiences were woven into the gentle rhythm of life rather than interrupting it. Through all these years, hardships came as naturally as the passing seasons. Droughts sometimes threatened crops. Winter storms occasionally trapped families inside for days. Illness touched some members, and accidents occasionally occurred. Yet families adapted. They learned to prepare, to anticipate, and to move steadily through difficulties. Every challenge reinforced lessons in patience, cooperation, and calm determination. Families who endured understood that life's unpredictability was part of its rhythm, and that steady effort and careful observation were always more powerful than panic or haste. By adulthood, children who had grown up in these homesteads were skilled, patient, and resourceful. They could tend a field, repair tools, manage livestock, prepare food, and care for younger siblings. Their education, both practical and moral, had been shaped by daily routines, consistent observation, and the steady example of their parents. They carried forward the values of quiet effort, patience, and connection to the land, preserving the calm rhythm of life for the next generation. Even as towns grew larger, railroads expanded, and new technologies appeared, families retained these rhythms. They adapted tools and methods where necessary, but the core of life remained unchanged. Careful planning, steady work, and attention to daily routines. The West was no longer empty, but it remained wide, quiet, and full of potential for those willing to move slowly, observe carefully, and work steadily. Generations built homes, raised families, and continued the quiet story that had begun decades earlier, ensuring that the rhythm of calm, deliberate life remained alive. Life on the frontier was shaped by a mixture of challenges and small successes, a careful balance between what could be controlled and what was left to the land, the weather, and circumstance. Families faced constant problems that required both patience and ingenuity. Crops could fail from drought or flood, insects could invade and consume what had taken months to plant, and storms could damage homes, fences, or barns. Illness struck unexpectedly, and medical care was often far away. A child's fever, a mother's injury, or a father's sprained ankle could disrupt the rhythm of the homestead for days or weeks, forcing families to adjust and compensate. Yet even within these hardships, there were aspects of life that were easier than one might imagine. Families learned to create routines that made work predictable, even when external events were uncertain. Children helped in meaningful ways, lightening the load on adults and learning valuable skills at the same time. Tools were simple but durable, allowing repairs to be made at home without waiting for a blacksmith or distant supplier. Families grew much of their own food, preserving it for winter and reducing dependence on outside markets. They made their own clothing when possible, sewed and patched repeatedly, and used natural resources for fuel, water, and shelter. These self-sufficient habits provided a quiet confidence in daily life, a sense that even when problems arose, there were ways to manage them. Earning money required creativity and careful planning. Many families were not wealthy, and cash was often scarce, but work and trade provided steady income. Farmers sold surplus crops such as wheat, corn, or vegetables in nearby towns or at occasional markets. Livestock could be traded or sold, providing both money and goods for the household. Some families took in extra work, offering services like blacksmithing, carpentry, or laundry to neighbors. Children sometimes helped by selling eggs, butter, or produce at town markets. Every transaction, every earned coin, was tied to the rhythm of the land and the labor that families performed. Money was rarely abundant, but it circulated slowly and deliberately, supporting the necessities of life while leaving room for careful planning for the future. The ease of life came from routine and preparation. Families who planned carefully could weather poor harvests or storms without panic. Preservation of food, proper storage of tools, and steady care of animals created a small measure of security. Even the smallest homestead could maintain a level of comfort if the work was done consistently. Simple pleasures, like a warm meal at the end of a day, the sound of a child's laughter, or the sight of a crop growing straight and strong, reinforced a sense of accomplishment and calm. Yet every homestead faced risks. Fires could sweep through fields or homes, often leaving little warning and forcing families to rebuild from scratch. Winter snow sometimes blocked roads for days, isolating families from markets or medical help. Disease among animals could reduce food supply or income, and unpredictable weather might turn a season's labor into loss. Families learned to anticipate these risks as much as possible. They built fences, dug wells, reinforced roofs, and stored firewood for the long months ahead. They shared knowledge with neighbors, offering guidance and assistance to avoid disasters that might otherwise overwhelm one household alone. The balance between challenges and preparation shaped life in subtle, consistent ways. Markets for selling goods were usually a day's journey away, sometimes more, which required planning and endurance. Families had to decide what crops to grow, what animals to raise, and when to sell or trade goods. Cash was necessary for items that could not be produced at home: metal tools, flour, sugar, and cloth. The timing of travel mattered greatly, as did careful packing of wagons or saddlebags to ensure that goods arrived intact. These trips were both work and learning experiences for children, who observed negotiations, weighed decisions, and understood the value of money earned through hard labor. Over time, they developed a practical understanding of trade, value, and responsibility. Barter remained common, especially in years when cash was scarce. Families traded eggs, milk, butter, or produced for items they could not make themselves. Tools, fabrics, and household goods were exchanged with neighbors or traveling merchants. This system required careful observation of needs and resources. Families learned to assess the value of what they had and to recognize what they needed most. It was a skill passed from parent to child quietly, through observation and repetition rather than formal teaching. These lessons shaped not only practical skills, but also a mindset of patience, careful evaluation, and resourcefulness. Work was always physical, yet it became easier as families developed routines. Daily movement built strength. Handling animals, digging ditches, and tending crops became part of the body's memory, allowing adults to complete demanding tasks without thinking of effort. Children developed these habits gradually, learning through repetition and guidance. The predictability of tasks created a sense of calm efficiency. Families rarely needed to rush because steady, deliberate work produced better results than haste. Over time, even the hardest days felt manageable as the rhythm of labor became ingrained and natural. Problems with health or injury were constant reminders of vulnerability. Medical care was limited, and families relied on home remedies, herbs, and practical knowledge. Mothers and fathers learned how to care for fevers, cuts, broken bones, and stomach illnesses. Sometimes neighboring families offered guidance when illness struck, sharing knowledge that had been passed through generations. The sense of community in these situations was practical, calm, and supportive rather than dramatic. Together, families developed a quiet resilience, understanding that patience, observation, and care often produced better outcomes than panic or expensive remedies that might not be available. Education continued quietly alongside work. Children often balanced school attendance with farm duties, learning lessons about reading and arithmetic in the morning and returning home to help with chores in the afternoon. Practical lessons about life were woven into these tasks. Watching the sky to predict storms taught observation skills, managing animals taught responsibility, and measuring crops or supplies reinforced numeracy. The combination of practical work and formal learning created well-rounded young adults, capable of both physical and intellectual effort, and prepared to take over family responsibilities when the time came. Social life existed in small, deliberate ways. Families visited neighbors for tea or meals, shared labor during harvest or construction, and attended occasional town gatherings. Celebrations were quite a small meal, a shared pie, or a few songs played on a fiddle. Even these events emphasized practicality and calmness over spectacle. Children observed interactions, learning manners, cooperation, and the importance of helping others. Social connections reinforced the calm rhythm of life, reminding families that even in a remote and challenging environment, they were not entirely alone. As families saved money, planned for the future, and tended the land, they also faced choices about expansion. Should they invest in more animals, build a larger barn, or purchase new tools? Should children move farther west or stay nearby? These decisions were shaped by careful observation, discussion, and practical calculation. The goal was always steady improvement without unnecessary risk. Money was a tool to maintain stability rather than a path to extravagance. The slow, deliberate management of resources ensured that families could weather bad seasons, respond to emergencies, and maintain continuity over the years. Even as the West became more settled, these rhythms remained central. Railroads allowed some goods to move faster, but they did not change the day-to-day realities of work, home, and family. Tools improved gradually, but the methods of planting, harvesting, mending, and caring for animals continued to follow long-established patterns. Generations remembered the lessons of the land: patience, steady effort, observation, and practical care. Children raised in these homes carried these lessons into their own households. Repeating the quiet rhythms that had shaped their upbringing, life continued with a careful balance between challenge and routine. Families learned over time which aspects of homestead life were manageable and which required constant vigilance. One persistent problem was the unpredictability of weather. Drought could turn fertile soil dry in a matter of weeks, leaving crops wilted and animals short of water. Heavy rains or flooding could destroy freshly planted seeds, wash away fences, and damage roads. In winter, deep snow and icy winds could isolate families for days, leaving them dependent entirely on their stored food and firewood. Even when conditions seemed stable, subtle changes, like a sudden cold snap in early spring, reminded families that the land always demanded attention. At the same time, some aspects of frontier life were reliably manageable. Families could maintain control over their immediate environment: the fences, the garden plots, and the animal pens. Regular routines created predictability. Water had to be drawn daily, animals fed and checked, firewood stacked, and meals prepared. These tasks, repeated day after day, provided not only sustenance, but also a rhythm that helped families face the more unpredictable elements of life with confidence. Children who followed the same routines learned a steady patience and resilience that would carry them through adulthood. Earning money was always part of this balance. Cash was limited, and many families relied on multiple small sources of income. Surplus crops, corn, wheat, and vegetables could be sold or traded in the nearest town. Families raised livestock such as cows, pigs, and chickens, selling milk, eggs, and meat to neighbors or traveling merchants. Some families took on side work, helping neighbors with barn raising, blacksmithing, or harvesting. Even children contributed, often bringing eggs or produce to market, or assisting in simple chores for payment. These small earnings were carefully managed, often invested in tools, clothing, or seed for the next planting season. The accumulation of money was slow but steady, a reflection of the patience that defined daily life. Bartering also played a crucial role. When cash was scarce, families traded goods and services. A dozen eggs might exchange for a bolt of cloth, or a sack of flour might trade for repaired tools. Families developed a keen sense of value, learning to assess the worth of their own goods and those of others. Trade was often a matter of careful negotiation, carried out with calm pragmatism rather than haste. These transactions were part of the ongoing education of children, who learned how to understand both the immediate needs and the long-term strategies necessary to maintain stability. Work itself could be physically demanding, but became easier through repetition and shared effort. Daily labor built endurance and strength. Children who grew up helping with chores learned to carry water, manage animals, and tend gardens with efficiency. Adults divided responsibilities, ensuring that no single task became overwhelming. The predictability of this work, combined with experience and teamwork, allowed families to meet difficult seasons with steady determination. Even the hardest tasks, when approached with calm routine, felt achievable and reinforced a quiet sense of accomplishment. Health and injury remained constant concerns. Medical care was limited, and even minor illnesses could disrupt the rhythm of a household. Families relied on home remedies, knowledge passed down through generations, and practical observation. Mothers often prepared herbal treatments, monitored symptoms, and carefully managed diets to help children recover. Fathers might set broken bones, tend wounds, or carry the family to the nearest town if necessary. The careful attention to health and the patient application of remedies ensured that families could maintain their work even when illness struck. Education intertwined naturally with daily life. Children often split their time between school and chores, learning to read, write, and do arithmetic in short lessons, then returning to practical work in the fields or at home. Skills learned from managing animals, observing weather, or preparing food reinforced lessons in responsibility, observation, and careful planning. The blending of formal education and hands-on learning created adults who were both thoughtful and capable, ready to maintain a homestead and raise the next generation. Community remained vital. Families often depended on neighbors for help during crises, sharing labor for barn raising, harvest, or fence repair. Social interactions were practical and measured, but meaningful. Even casual visits carried lessons about cooperation, generosity, and reliability. Children learned social responsibility through participation, understanding that mutual aid was part of maintaining stability in an environment that was sometimes unforgiving. Religious observances and holidays offered quiet reflection rather than spectacle. Families attended church services, shared simple meals with neighbors, and marked seasonal events with rituals that were calm and deliberate. These moments reinforced the values that governed daily life: patience, diligence, and care for one another. They also provided a framework for passing traditions and lessons to the next generation, strengthening both family and community bonds. The passage of time brought gradual changes. Railroads connected distant towns, allowing for faster trade and access to goods that were previously difficult to obtain. Tools improved, making some labor lighter or more efficient. Even with these changes, the core rhythms of life remained. Work began at dawn. Meals were prepared from what the family produced. Children learned through observation and practice, and care for the homestead governed each day. The introduction of new technologies and markets expanded options, but did not replace the steady habits that families had cultivated over decades. Over years and decades, children matured into adults who understood the rhythms of life in the West. Sons learned to plow straight furrows, guide animals, repair fences, and manage tools. Daughters mastered cooking, sewing, preserving food, and maintaining the household. When young adults married and began their own homes, they continued the practices they had grown up with, reinforcing the slow, steady patterns that had sustained their families. Generations built on one another's labor, creating a continuous thread of calm, patient work that defined life on the frontier. Money, while limited, was always carefully managed. Families saved for emergencies, invested in tools, and purchased essentials they could not make themselves. Surplus produce, livestock, and handmade goods provided income or barter opportunities. The careful stewardship of resources was as important as the labor itself, ensuring that the family could survive poor seasons, recover from misfortune, and continue to grow steadily. Children learned the value of money in this context, not as a means for luxury, but as a tool for stability, security, and continued self-sufficiency. Challenges continued, of course. Fires, floods, storms, illness, and animal disease all required patience and resilience. Families faced these challenges with practical strategies reinforcing homes, storing food, preparing remedies, and cooperating with neighbors. The daily rhythm of work, learning, and community created a buffer against sudden crisis. Even when hardship struck, families had the routines, knowledge, and mutual support to respond calmly and effectively. Through it all, the West remained a place of both challenge and opportunity. Families raised children, built homes, tended crops, and cared for animals within a framework of steady, deliberate effort. They earned and managed money carefully, traded goods and services when necessary, and found ease in routines that had become second nature. They faced problems with patience, and they celebrated small successes with quiet satisfaction. the rhythm of life. Work, observation, learning, and reflection was both a necessity and a comfort, shaping generations who understood the value of calm perseverance in the face of an unpredictable land. Even as towns expanded and technology improved, the patterns established in the early frontier homes continued to guide families. Children who grew up with these routines passed them on, ensuring continuity in a rapidly changing world. Communities remained interconnected, work remained steady, and the daily rhythms of life, so carefully constructed over years of effort, remained intact. Life in the West was not measured by speed or drama, but by persistence, careful planning, and the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. Families on the frontier quickly learned that hardship could arrive in many forms, each demanding steady attention and practical solutions. Droughts were among the most common and feared problems. When rain failed to come, soil dried and cracked, crops wilted, and livestock suffered. Families responded with careful management, rationing water for animals, digging additional wells or ditches where possible, and sometimes replanting with hardier crops. Children helped carry water, while adults monitored the soil and vegetation for signs of stress. It was slow, laborious work, but it was necessary, and families adapted gradually, accepting that patience often brought better results than panic. Even a modest harvest could sustain a household if it was managed carefully. Illness struck often and without warning. Common ailments included fevers, digestive problems, injuries from labor or animals, and childhood illnesses that today might be minor but were more serious then. Medical help was usually distant, so families relied on home remedies and accumulated knowledge. Herbs, poultices, hot compresses, and careful rest were combined with observation and discipline. Parents taught children how to measure doses, watch for warning signs, and maintain hygiene. When a serious illness arose, the entire household adjusted, slowing work, sharing chores differently, and supporting those who were sick. Even in these situations, calm routines helped sustain order and prevent chaos. Animal health was another ongoing concern. Livestock provided food, income, and labor, but disease, injury, or loss could be devastating. Families learned to observe animals daily, noting subtle changes in behavior or appetite that might indicate illness. They isolated sick animals, adjusted diets, or treated wounds with basic remedies. Herds and flocks were rotated through pastures to prevent overgrazing and maintain to help. Children learned to help, watching for lameness, checking water and feed, and assisting with milking or feeding. These practices not only preserved vital resources, but also taught children responsibility, observation, and careful attention to detail. Economic life was a continuous balancing act. Families earned money primarily through the sale of crops, livestock, and occasionally handmade goods. Surplus wheat, corn, or vegetables went to town markets, while butter, eggs, or meat could be traded for goods or cash. Work was slow but steady, and careful record-keeping, often in simple notebooks or on scraps of paper, ensured that every transaction was accounted for. Families learned to prioritize needs. Tools, fabric, or seeds often came first, while luxuries were postponed. This deliberate approach to money management helped families survive lean seasons and plan for long-term stability. Barter remained a valuable method of managing scarcity. Eggs, milk, or produce might be exchanged for items like cloth, sugar, or metal tools. Skilled work, like blacksmithing or carpentry, could be traded for food or services. Families observed value carefully, learning what others needed most and what they could offer in return. Children absorbed these lessons quietly, understanding that cooperation, negotiation, and patience could be as valuable as cash. Trade strengthened community bonds while supporting the practical needs of each household. Some problems were seasonal but predictable. Winter brought isolation and cold, demanding careful preparation. Families stocked firewood, preserved food, and reinforced homes. Work inside the house, sewing, cooking, mending, and crafting, became central. Children practiced skills that would serve them for life, from cooking and cleaning to learning to make and repair clothing. These quieter months reinforced patience and reflection. Families could not control the weather, but they could control their preparation, and careful planning ensured that even the harshest winter did not overwhelm them. Other challenges were sudden, like storms, fires, or the unexpected loss of an animal. Families learned to respond calmly, prioritizing safety first, then tending to property and livestock. Neighbors often helped in these situations, bringing additional hands to repair roofs, rebuild fences, or rescue animals. The shared experience of overcoming difficulty reinforced practical cooperation and created quiet confidence. Even children absorbed lessons about vigilance, responsibility, and the value of steady effort under pressure. Despite these difficulties, life offered moments of ease and comfort. Routine tasks became second nature, milking cows, gathering eggs, chopping wood, or tending crops. When performed daily, these tasks required less conscious effort and allowed families to notice subtler aspects of life, like the changing seasons or the behavior of animals. Children grew adept at chores, learning to anticipate needs and act without constant instruction. Even labor that might have seemed daunting at first became manageable through repetition and careful attention. Education and learning continued alongside labor. Formal lessons, often limited to reading, writing, and arithmetic, were balanced with practical instruction. Children learned to measure, weigh, observe, and calculate in the context of real tasks. Planning a garden, distributing water, or calculating the amount of feed for animals all became exercises in practical math. Skills were passed down informally as well, through observation, demonstration, and repeated practice. Over time, children developed both intellectual and practical competence, a combination essential for survival and prosperity in the West. Community and social support were crucial. Families could rarely manage every problem alone. Seasonal gatherings, church services, or informal visits offered opportunities for advice, assistance, and shared labor. Neighbors helped each other raise barns, harvest crops, and care for children during illness. Children witnessed these cooperative efforts, internalizing the importance of helping and depending on others without relying on external institutions. These bonds created networks of support that helped families withstand adversity calmly. Money, though often scarce, was earned and managed carefully. Cash came from selling surplus crops, livestock, or handmade goods. Small side work supplemented income. Families prioritized essential needs, tools, seed, and food before anything else. Barter offered an alternative when cash was not available, trading goods and skills within the community. Children learned the value of careful management, understanding that wealth in the West was measured more by security, stability, and preparedness than by abundance. The rhythm of daily life provided a sense of continuity. Work, education, meals, and rest followed predictable patterns. Even amid adversity, families relied on these routines for stability. Tasks repeated daily or seasonally, and children internalized lessons about diligence, patience, and foresight. Over time, the repetition of work, observation, and learning created a calm confidence that allowed families to face the unpredictability of frontier life with steady resolve. Generations passed, and knowledge accumulated. Parents taught children not only how to plant, harvest, and care for animals, but also how to plan for emergencies, manage money, and interact responsibly with neighbors. Each generation added small improvements, learning from successes and failures. The slow accumulation of knowledge created households that were both resilient and self-sufficient. Even when towns expanded and railroads reached further into the West, the lessons of careful planning, steady work, and practical cooperation remained central. Life in the West was, therefore, a continuous interplay between problems and solutions, between challenges and steady routines. Families faced droughts, illness, economic scarcity, and weather-related disasters, yet found calm through careful preparation, patient work, community support, and practical knowledge. Money was earned slowly, traded wisely, and managed deliberately. Children learned the rhythm of labor, observation, and responsibility. Together, these elements created households that were resilient, self-reliant, and rooted in the quiet but persistent rhythms of daily life. Life in the West demanded constant attention to both work and survival. Droughts could devastate crops, leaving fields bare and livestock thirsty, while sudden storms sometimes washed away fences or damaged homes. Settlers learned to planfully, digging extra wells, rotating pastures, and planting hardier varieties of crops to reduce the risk of total loss. Children helped carry water and tended small garden plots, gradually learning to read subtle signs in the soil and sky that indicated changing weather patterns. Observation became a daily habit, a quiet skill that ensured survival even when resources were scarce. Illness was another frequent concern. With medical care often miles away, remedies were homemade and knowledge was passed down through generations. Fevers, cuts, broken bones, and infections required careful attention and patience. Herbal treatments were common, along with poultices, warm compresses, and rest. When illness struck, work slowed or shifted. Tasks were redistributed, ensuring that essential chores like feeding livestock, chopping wood, and cooking could continue. Even children were expected to contribute, learning to maintain routines that kept the household functioning. Practical knowledge about health became a central part of upbringing, passed quietly through daily practice rather than formal instruction. Livestock provided both food and income, but keeping animals healthy was a constant challenge. Disease, injury, and poor grazing conditions could threaten herds and flocks. Careful daily observation was essential. Animals were checked for signs of illness, given proper feed, and rotated through pastures to preserve grasslands. Sick animals were isolated and treated, while calves, lambs, or chicks were watched closely for signs of weakness. These responsibilities taught children about responsibility, patience, and problem-solving. Over time, these skills became second nature, forming a quiet expertise in animal husbandry that would serve them throughout life. Economic stability depended on steady work, careful management, and sometimes ingenuity. Cash could be scarce, so income often came from multiple sources. Surplus wheat, corn, or vegetables were sold in nearby towns, while milk, eggs, butter, and meat provided both cash and goods for trade. Small side jobs such as carpentry, blacksmithing, or repairing wagons supplemented earnings. Children often helped by taking produce to markets or assisting with minor labor. Every coin earned was carefully accounted for, prioritized for essential tools, seed, and supplies before any discretionary spending. The economy of daily life relied on patience and careful judgment, with small gains accumulated over time. Bartering played a significant role when cash was limited. Eggs, milk, or vegetables might be exchanged for cloth, sugar, or household goods. Skilled labor could also be traded, helping repair a neighbor's roof, mending fences, or assisting in the harvest. Children learned to assess value, negotiate fairly, and understand the needs of others. Barter strengthened community ties while supporting the practical needs of each household, providing both goods and a sense of shared responsibility. Some challenges were seasonal. Winter brought cold, shorter days, and isolation. Preparation was essential. Food was preserved, firewood stacked, and buildings reinforced to withstand snow and wind. Indoor work became central sewing, mending, cooking, and making repairs. Children practiced skills that would serve them in adulthood, from tending fires and preparing meals to crafting or repairing clothing. These quieter months encouraged patience, observation, and planning, demonstrating that calm preparation could offset the harshness of the elements. Sudden events, storms, fires, or the loss of animals required quick, practical response. Priorities were safety, securing property, and caring for animals. Neighbors often assisted, bringing extra hands to rebuild or rescue what could be saved. These cooperative efforts reinforced trust and mutual dependence, quietly teaching children the value of teamwork and resilience. Observing these interactions became an education in itself, imparting lessons about responsibility, patience, and measured action. Daily labor, though physically demanding, became manageable through routine. Chores repeated in predictable cycles: milking, feeding animals, tending gardens, and chopping wood, built endurance and skill. Children gradually assumed more responsibilities, learning to anticipate needs and act efficiently. Repetition created confidence, transforming difficult tasks into manageable routines. Calm observation of small changes, like the growth of plants or the behavior of livestock, became a central part of life. Education was often intertwined with labor. Reading, writing, and arithmetic were taught in formal lessons, while practical applications of these skills were embedded in daily chores. Measuring fields, calculating feed, tracking expenditures, and observing patterns in crops reinforced learning through experience. Children absorbed knowledge both academically and practically, gaining skills necessary for survival and management of resources. Social connections were maintained through visits, community gatherings, and religious observances. Church services, shared meals, or small celebrations offered opportunities for advice, labor exchange, and companionship. These interactions were calm and purposeful, teaching cooperation, generosity, and responsibility. Children learned social skills in the context of practical, everyday life, witnessing the importance of mutual aid and reliability. Money was managed carefully. Income from crops, livestock, and handmade goods was prioritized for essential needs first, with careful savings for emergencies. Barter supplemented cash when necessary. Families learned the importance of budgeting, forecasting for poor seasons, and investing in tools or resources that would provide long-term benefits. Children observed and participated in these decisions, internalizing the value of prudence and planning. Over time, knowledge accumulated across generations. Skills in planting, harvesting, animal care, and household management were refined, while strategies for weather, illness, and economic challenges evolved. Children learned from their parents' experience, gradually assuming responsibilities and making small improvements. Continuity of knowledge created households capable of enduring adversity, adapting to change, and maintaining stability in a world that was often unpredictable. Even as towns expanded and technology advanced, the principles of steady work, observation, preparation, and cooperation remained central. Daily life continued to follow the rhythm established long before, combining labor, learning, social interaction, and careful management of resources. Children growing up in these homes inherited both skills and values, ensuring that each generation was capable, resilient, and connected to both land and community. Hardships remained a part of life, yet steady routines, careful observation, and practical knowledge offered solutions. Droughts, storms, illness, and economic scarcity were met with patience and calm effort. Labor was divided and repeated, education was integrated with work, and resources were managed deliberately. The balance of challenge and routine, difficulty and careful planning created a life that was demanding yet rewarding, unpredictable yet orderly. Children absorbed these lessons naturally, becoming capable adults who could manage both the household and the land, and who could teach the same skills to their own children. Life in the West also revolved around seasonal cycles that shaped both work and opportunity. Spring brought planting, repair of fences, and preparation for the summer months. Children and adults alike were busy in the fields, sowing seeds for crops like corn, wheat, and beans. Each family had to anticipate the needs of their household for months ahead, calculating how much seed to plant, which animals to breed, and which tasks could wait until later in the season. Early mornings were spent tending young plants, while afternoons often focused on animal care or mending tools. The rhythm of planting and preparation created a steady pace that carried families forward through the unpredictable months ahead. Summer brought both reward and labor. Crops grew quickly under the sun, and livestock needed constant attention. Families rose with the sun and worked until long after it set, monitoring fields for weeds, pests, or signs of drought. Children carried out smaller tasks, gathering eggs, bringing water to animals, and helping in gardens. It was a time of hard labor, but also small successes, as families could see the progress of their work daily. Surplus produce offered opportunities for trade or sale, providing much needed money or goods to supplement what they could not produce themselves. Markets in nearby towns became important destinations, requiring careful planning to transport goods safely and efficiently. Autumn shifted the focus to harvest. Fields had to be cleared before frost, grain stored, and vegetables preserved for winter. Families worked together to gather crops, thresh wheat, and pack vegetables into root cellars. Preserving food required skill and attention. Proper drying, salting, or canning ensured that stores would last through the cold months. Livestock were prepared for winter, with extra feed stacked, pens reinforced, and animals sheltered from the worst weather. Autumn demanded endurance, precision, and teamwork. But it was also a season of accomplishment, as the work of months became tangible in stored food and prepared animals. Winter slowed activity, but did not stop it entirely. Snow and ice often made travel difficult, isolating households for days or weeks. Families turned inward, focusing on indoor tasks: sewing, mending clothes, maintaining equipment, and cooking preserved food. Children practiced domestic skills, learning to knit, bake, and prepare meals from simple ingredients. Men often repaired tools or crafted furniture, while women preserved and organized supplies. These months of relative calm allowed time for reflection, planning, and quiet learning. Even as work became less physically demanding, it remained purposeful and necessary. Economic opportunity often required travel beyond the homestead. Families made trips to towns or trading posts to sell surplus goods, buy essential supplies, or trade for items they could not produce. Traveling could be slow and tiring, with wagons carrying produce, milk, eggs, or homemade goods along rough roads. Weather, distance, and the condition of animals all influenced the success of these trips. Careful planning ensured that goods arrived in good condition, money or traded items were received fairly, and families returned home with resources that would sustain them through the next season. Bartering remained an integral part of economic life. Families exchanged goods and services, often negotiating the value of items carefully. Eggs, butter, or vegetables could be traded for tools, sugar, cloth, or even repairs to wagons or roofs. Skilled labor such as carpentry or blacksmithing was particularly valuable in barter, allowing families to meet needs without relying solely on cash. Children observed these exchanges, learning not only the practical value of goods, but also the importance of fair negotiation, honesty, and community cooperation. Unexpected challenges were frequent. Fires, animal illness, and storms could threaten food supplies, property, and income. Families learned to respond calmly, prioritizing safety, property protection, and the care of essential animals. Neighbors often assisted in emergencies, sharing labor to rebuild, repair, or rescue resources. These experiences reinforced both practical skills and social bonds, teaching children the value of cooperation, quick thinking, and measured response in difficult situations. Daily labor created a steady rhythm that became second nature. Tasks were divided according to age, ability, and urgency. Milking, feeding animals, gardening, chopping wood, and mending clothing all occurred in predictable cycles. Children gradually assumed more responsibility, learning to anticipate needs and act efficiently. The repetition of work instilled confidence, turning challenging tasks into manageable routines. Observation of plants, animals, and the weather taught attentiveness and foresight, skills essential for long-term success. Education was woven seamlessly into daily life. Reading, writing, and arithmetic were practiced in small lessons, while practical applications reinforced understanding. Children measured plots for planting, calculated feed for animals, or managed household accounts, linking academic learning to everyday tasks. Over time, these experiences created adults capable of both practical labor and thoughtful management, prepared to maintain homes, care for families, and respond to unexpected challenges. Social connections were maintained in small but meaningful ways. Visits with neighbors, Shared meals and community gatherings provided opportunities for support, advice, and labor sharing. Children learn social skills, cooperation, and generosity by participating in these interactions. Observing neighbors handle crises, share work, or celebrate small successes offered practical lessons in resilience, community responsibility, and the value of steady effort. Money management was deliberate and careful. Income from crops, livestock, and handmade goods was prioritized for essential needs and emergency preparation. Barter supplemented cash income, allowing families to acquire necessary goods without relying entirely on distant markets. Children observed budgeting, planning, and a careful decision-making, learning that security was more important than abundance. Money and resources were tools to maintain stability and ensure survival, not for extravagance or leisure. Over years, experience accumulated. Adults and children developed skills in agriculture, animal care, household management, and planning for emergencies. Knowledge passed quietly from generation to generation, creating a continuity of experience. Children gradually assumed adult responsibilities, prepared to manage both home and land, and capable of teaching the next generation. Daily routines, careful preparation, and steady observation allowed households to endure challenges and maintain a measure of calm and stability in a world that often demanded adaptability and persistence. As children grew older, their roles within the household expanded. By early adolescence, many were expected to take on responsibilities that earlier had been managed by adults. Boys often learned to plow fields, repair fences, and care for larger livestock, while girls increasingly assisted in cooking, sewing, preserving food, and managing household supplies. These tasks were not rushed. Instead, skills were learned gradually through observation, repetition, and careful guidance. Each success, no matter how small, reinforced competence and confidence. One of the first major responsibilities for many children was managing trips to nearby towns or trading posts. These journeys were rarely rushed. They required careful planning to ensure that goods remained safe and valuable. Children might carry baskets of eggs, milk, or vegetables, or help load wagons with small livestock or handmade goods. They learned to navigate rough roads, anticipate weather changes, and negotiate the best exchanges for their produce. These trips were educational as well as practical, teaching children how money and barter worked in real-world situations. At the market, children observed and participated in the careful art of exchange. Farmers and townspeople valued fairness and honesty, and reputation was important. Selling goods or trading services required understanding demand, quality, and timing. Children learned to weigh produce, assess the freshness of eggs, and identify items suitable for trade. They practiced basic arithmetic, calculating total costs or the number of items needed for a fair trade. Success on these trips was measured not just in profit, but in learning to conduct transactions with patience and care. Back at home, children applied these lessons to daily routines. They measured feed for animals, distributed water, tended small gardens, and assisted in food preservation. Every task became a lesson in foresight and planning. Even simple chores like chopping wood, cleaning pens, or making repairs provided practical education. By participating fully, children developed a sense of responsibility and an understanding of how small actions contributed to the survival and success of the household. Economic challenges remained ever present. Weather, illness, and occasional crop failure required careful management of resources. Families learned to balance immediate needs with long-term planning, storing surplus food, saving coins, and maintaining essential tools. Children observed and participated in these decisions, gaining insight into the value of preparation and patience. Small successes and failures alike provided practical lessons in judgment and resilience. Education continued in small, manageable increments. Formal reading, writing, and arithmetic lessons were often brief, interspersed with practical application. Children might keep a ledger of produce sold, calculate feed requirements for livestock, or estimate seed quantities for planting. Learning through practice ensured that knowledge was directly useful and reinforced understanding. Over time, children became capable of managing both the practical and financial aspects of household life. Work and learning were interwoven with community support. Neighbors offered assistance in times of need, such as helping during harvest or repairing damaged structures. Children observed cooperation firsthand, learning to help others, ask for help when necessary, and recognize the value of collective effort. Community gatherings, whether for labor, celebration, or religious observance, strengthened social bonds and provided models of calm, organized problem solving. Seasonal work continued to dictate routines. Spring planting, summer tending, autumn harvest, and winter preparation provided structure for daily life. Each season brought predictable challenges and responsibilities, allowing children to plan and anticipate tasks. Repetition and observation created proficiency, enabling young people to contribute meaningfully and to take on new responsibilities over time. Patience and persistence were as essential as physical labor. Travel for trade or market sale often taught children more than domestic or farm work. They learned geography, timing, negotiation, and practical budgeting. A successful trip meant not only that goods were exchanged or sold, but that children understood how the household depended on careful planning and precise execution. The knowledge gained through these trips reinforced broader lessons in responsibility, independence, and self-reliance. Financial understanding grew alongside practical skills. Children learned to manage coins carefully, save for emergencies, and make decisions about when to sell, trade, or hold back goods. They understood the value of preparation and foresight, realizing that every choice influenced the household's ability to withstand future challenges. Money, while limited, became a tool for stability rather than luxury. Small earnings, carefully managed, provided security and opportunity, ensuring that families could survive poor seasons or recover from setbacks. Health and safety remained central to all work. Children learned to handle animals gently, avoid injury while chopping wood or working in fields, and recognize the signs of illness in themselves, siblings, and livestock. Basic remedies and first aid were taught early, ensuring that children could respond calmly and effectively to accidents or sickness. Practical knowledge of health reinforced the broader lessons of care, foresight, and responsibility woven through daily life. By late adolescence, children had often achieved near adult competence. Boys could manage significant portions of land and livestock, while girls were proficient in household management, cooking, sewing, and food preservation. They were prepared to take on leadership within the family, assume responsibility for younger siblings, and eventually establish their own homes. The gradual accumulation of skills, knowledge, and experience ensured that the next generation could maintain continuity, stability, and independence. Even with the expansion of towns, railroads, and markets, the lessons learned through hands-on work, observation, and careful management remained central. Daily routines, economic planning, and practical knowledge continue to guide households. Children who grew up with these experiences became adults capable of responding calmly to challenges, managing resources effectively, and contributing to both household and community life. The interplay of labor, learning, travel, and trade created a full, measured life. Challenges were constant, from weather to illness to financial uncertainty, yet each was met with preparation, patience, and persistence. Children's education was not separate from daily life, but embedded in every task, every market trip, and every moment of observation. By the time young people assumed adult responsibilities, they carried both skill and wisdom, ensuring that households could thrive even in a demanding and unpredictable environment. Life in the West was structured around both necessity and opportunity, and one of the most critical aspects of daily life was the careful movement of goods and the management of resources. Trade and market visits were essential for obtaining items families could not produce themselves, such as cloth, tools, sugar, salt, and medicines. These trips were planned well in advance. Children often helped prepare items for sale or barter, packing baskets, checking produce, and ensuring that eggs, milk, or baked goods were in good condition. Each item carried value, and the quality of goods often determined the success of a market trip. Traveling to market could take several hours or even days, depending on distance and weather conditions. Roads were frequently rough, requiring careful attention to wagons, horses, and loads. Families learned to calculate the best route, anticipate the weather, and allow for unexpected delays. Children accompanied parents, observing the process of negotiation, the rhythms of trading, and the need for patience. These trips offered both practical experience and social education, as market towns were gathering places for people from various communities, each with different goods, knowledge, and customs. Once at market, families needed to convert produce and goods into cash or tradable items efficiently. Eggs were sold by the dozen, butter and cheese by the pound, and grains by measured bushels. Children learned how to measure accurately, weigh items on scales, and count money. Transactions were carried out with attention to fairness, and reputation mattered greatly. Sellers who were honest and consistent were trusted and often received better prices or favorable trades in the future. The lessons learned in these markets about commerce, integrity, and value were as important as the goods themselves. Bartering complemented cash transactions and was a skill often taught early. Families exchanged items according to need. A dozen eggs might trade for a length of cloth or a bag of flour for repaired tools. Skilled work, such as carpentry or blacksmithing, was especially valuable in barter economies. Children observed negotiations closely, learning to assess both the immediate and long-term value of goods, to estimate how many eggs or pounds of produce were equivalent to a bolt of cloth or a repaired wagon wheel. The process taught resourcefulness, patience, and practical decision-making. While market trips offered opportunity, they also presented challenges. Weather could turn roads into mud, delaying travel and spoiling goods. Theft was a constant concern, requiring careful supervision and sometimes travel in groups for safety. Illness or injury along the journey had to be managed with the same practical remedies used at home. Families learned to prepare thoroughly, carry spare items, and travel with caution. Children gained experience in risk management, understanding that preparation and attentiveness could prevent loss and ensure success. Back at home, daily life continued in a rhythm that balanced labor, learning, and preparation. Crops required attention from dawn until dusk, watering, weeding, and tending fields to protect against pests and disease. Animals demanded constant care, from feeding and milking to monitoring for illness or injury. Children carried out age-appropriate tasks, gradually assuming responsibility for larger or more complex work as they matured. Routine work became second nature, allowing families to respond calmly to unexpected problems without being overwhelmed. Seasonal changes dictated much of this rhythm. Spring required planting and repair of equipment, summer brought growing and maintenance, autumn demanded harvest and preservation, and winter focused on preparation and indoor work. Each season carried predictable challenges, and careful planning allowed families to manage these cycles efficiently. Children learned to anticipate tasks, measure supplies, and manage time, developing practical skills that would serve them throughout life. Financial management was woven into every aspect of life. Money earned from market sales, small side jobs, or bartered goods was prioritized carefully. Families saved for emergencies, purchased essential items, and invested in improvements that increased efficiency or comfort. Children observed and sometimes participated in these decisions, learning to allocate resources, plan ahead, and balance immediate needs with long-term goals. The process taught patience, foresight, and a realistic understanding of value. Unexpected events remained constant. Crop failure, animal disease, illness, or accidents could threaten both subsistence and income. Families developed strategies for coping, storing surplus food, maintaining reserves of cash or tradable goods, and cultivating strong relationships with neighbors for mutual aid. Children observed problem-solving in action, internalizing lessons about resilience, collaboration, and practical improvisation. These experiences taught that calm observation, preparation, and steady work were essential to overcoming challenges. Education was integrated with daily labor. Arithmetic was practiced in the context of weighing produce, calculating feed, or budgeting for supplies. Reading and writing skills were applied to keep simple records, note sales, and track bartered goods. Observation of patterns in weather, crop growth, and animal behavior reinforced scientific thinking. Education was not separate from daily life, it was embedded in every task, reinforcing skills necessary for survival, management, and social interaction. Health and safety remained essential. Children learned early how to prevent injury while handling tools or animals, recognize early signs of illness, and apply remedies with calm attention. Minor accidents were treated at home with poultices, splints, and rest. Serious illness required careful monitoring, sometimes a trip to the nearest town or assistance from neighbors. Children became competent caregivers, understanding the value of steady observation, practical skill, and patience in maintaining the household's well-being. Community connections strengthened resilience. Neighbors assisted each other during harvest, construction, or crises. Shared labor reinforced cooperation and taught children the importance of helping others. Social gatherings, church attendance, and seasonal events provided opportunities for exchange of knowledge, resources, and advice. Observing these interactions offered a quiet education in social responsibility, practical problem solving, and the value of calm, steady collaboration. Over time, children matured into adults capable of managing both domestic and economic responsibilities. Boys learned to manage land and livestock independently, while girls became proficient in household management and food preservation. Market trips were increasingly handled with confidence and competence. Children who had participated in daily labor, financial management, and community cooperation were prepared to maintain households, teach the next generation, and ensure continuity of knowledge and practice. The rhythm of life, work, trade, education, and community provided a steady framework. Challenges were constant, but careful preparation, practical skill, and observation allowed households to endure adversity. Each season offered both labor and learning, teaching children to balance effort with patience. Money was earned slowly, resources were managed wisely, and work was approached methodically. Through repeated experience, each generation gained the knowledge, skill, and confidence needed to thrive. Even as towns expanded and technology slowly reached new areas, these foundational practices remained central. Daily routines, market participation, careful resource management, and community cooperation continued to guide households. Children who had grown up in this environment carried forward both practical skills and the values of patience, observation, and responsibility. They understood that the life of the West was demanding yet rewarding, requiring both effort and foresight, and that calm, steady work could overcome even unpredictable challenges. The story of daily life in the West was long and detailed, stretching across seasons, years, and generations. Each household followed a rhythm of work, learning, and careful planning, adapting to challenges while taking advantage of opportunities. Children grew into competent adults, prepared to manage households, participate in markets, and contribute to their communities. Money and goods were managed with care, labor was divided and repeated, and practical knowledge accumulated slowly but steadily. This steady pace, balancing challenge with routine, created households capable of enduring hardship, celebrating small successes, and maintaining continuity across generations. In one small homestead near the rolling hills of Kansas, a family worked steadily to maintain both their land and their children. The father, John, managed the fields and the livestock, rising before dawn to feed cows and horses, repair fences, and prepare the soil for planting. His wife, Mary, oversaw the household cooking, preserving food, tending the garden, and teaching their children practical skills. Their two eldest children, Anna and Samuel, were assigned tasks appropriate to their age. Anna helped with sewing and cooking, while Samuel assisted in feeding animals and carrying water. Slowly, through observation and repetition, both children learned the responsibilities necessary to manage a household and maintain the farm. Mary was patient in her teaching. She instructed Anna on how to make bread from scratch, knead dough properly, and preserve fruits through careful drying or boiling. Anna would watch, then practice, learning that patience and careful attention ensured that the work was both effective and lasting. Samuel learned alongside his father, handling small tools at first and gradually moving on to more complex tasks like repairing fences, driving the wagon, and tending the plough. Each child learned through doing, guided by instruction, corrected gently when mistakes were made, and praised when effort was steady and careful. On Sundays, the family attended the local church, traveling together with neighbors. The trips were long, and the children learned to handle the physical effort of walking or riding with patience. At church, they observed social norms, listening attentively, helping younger siblings, and participating in community rituals. This experience reinforced social learning, teaching them how to behave responsibly, interact with others politely, and participate in communal life. As the seasons changed, the children's responsibilities grew. During planting season, Anna would help prepare seed for the garden, while Samuel assisted in ploughing and planting small plots. When harvest time arrived, both children were engaged fully in gathering crops, threshing wheat, and storing vegetables in root cellars. These tasks were not simply labor, they were lessons in observation, timing, and foresight. Children learned to anticipate needs, manage time, and work together with family members to complete necessary work. In another homestead in the New Mexico territory, a widow named Clara raised 3 children alone. She relied on both teaching and example to instill responsibility. Each morning she led her children through a series of chores, feeding chickens, collecting eggs, checking the garden, and preparing breakfast. Children were assigned tasks based on age and ability, but each task contributed to the survival of the household. Clara's eldest son, Miguel, learned to manage the small herd of goats, recognizing signs of illness and knowing how to provide care. Her daughters, Rosa and Lucia, learned sewing, cooking, and food preservation. Each skill was taught gradually, with repeated practice and correction, ensuring that the children became competent and self-reliant. Clara also emphasized practical learning. When traveling to the nearest town to trade eggs and vegetables, the children observed the process of measuring, weighing, and negotiating with merchants. They learned the value of goods, the importance of honesty, and the patience needed to complete transactions successfully. Even small errors, miscounted eggs, or poorly packed vegetables became lessons in attention to detail and responsibility. The children gradually developed confidence and independence, understanding that their contributions were essential to the household's survival. In a small cabin along the Missouri River, the Thompson family demonstrated a different approach. Their 2 sons, Henry and Thomas, were given a high level of responsibility early, as their father believed children learned best by experience. Each day, the boys accompanied him to tend livestock, repair tools, or fish for additional food. Mistakes were met with guidance, not punishment, and successes were acknowledged, building both skill and confidence. Their mother, Sarah, focused on household management and teaching literacy and arithmetic, integrating these lessons into daily life, measuring flour for bread, calculating quantities for market sales, and keeping simple accounts of money and trade. The Thompsons balanced labor with education, understanding that practical skills and knowledge were equally important. By observing and participating in daily life, the boys gained hands on understanding of survival, responsibility, and the rhythms of work. They also learned problem solving. When a fence broke, they figured out how to gather tools, repair the structure, and secure the animals without outside assistance. These experiences taught independence, resilience, and the value of careful, patient effort. A different model existed in the Rocky Mountain region, where ranching families raised children in more isolated circumstances. The Reynolds family lived miles from the nearest neighbor, and every member contributed to survival. The eldest daughter, Emily, was responsible for preparing meals and tending small livestock, while her younger brother, Jacob, assisted with heavier labor such as chopping wood or hauling water. Education was intermittent, taught through letters from distant teachers or short visits by traveling instructors. However, practical learning filled the gaps. The children learned to read the weather, track animals, and prepare food for storage, developing a quiet confidence and self-reliance. Even in these remote homesteads, parents emphasized consistency, patience, and observation. Tasks were repeated daily, gradually increasing in complexity as children grew. Mistakes were corrected calmly, allowing children to understand cause and effect. Successes were recognized, reinforcing the value of steady effort. Through these experiences, children acquired skills that would serve them as adults, ensuring that they could manage households, tend land, and maintain stability in challenging environments. These stories illustrate that raising children in the West required balancing labor, learning, and guidance. Children learned through observation, repetition, and participation in household and economic activities. Each day provided practical lessons in responsibility, problem-solving, and social interaction. Parents relied on patience, instruction, and modeling behavior to ensure children gradually became capable and independent. Work was intertwined with education, and survival depended on careful planning, observation, and persistent effort. Clothing in the Wild West was both a practical necessity and a reflection of the careful planning that families had to undertake. Most garments were homemade, produced from simple fabrics that could withstand the hard work of daily life. Wool, linen, and cotton were common materials, often purchased in bulks from nearby towns or received through trade. Families carefully rationed these fabrics, making dresses, shirts, pants, and undergarments themselves. Sewing was not just a domestic skill, but an essential part of household management, taught from a young age and practiced every day. Women and girls spent long hours at sewing benches, repairing worn clothing, altering garments for growing children, and making new items from scratch. Patterns were simple, designed to use fabric efficiently, and clothing was constructed to endure frequent washing and heavy use. Men and boys also wore practical clothing, sturdy trousers, shirts, and jackets, often reinforced with patches or double layers at stress points. Leatherwork, such as belts, boots, and gloves, required both skill and materials, which were sometimes traded for or purchased at markets. Dyeing and mending were crucial parts of clothing care. Families learned to stretch the life of garments through careful mending, stitching holes, reinforcing seams, and patching worn areas. Sometimes remnants of old fabric were combined to make new garments or quilts. Natural dyes derived from plants, berries, or even bark were used when available, allowing families to color clothing or brighten faded items. Children were taught these skills gradually, beginning with small repairs and eventually helping to construct entire garments. Trade and purchase supplemented homemade clothing. Families occasionally visited towns or trading posts to acquire new fabric, ready-made garments, or specialized items. These trips required careful planning, as money was limited and goods needed to be prioritized according to necessity. For example, a sturdy pair of boots or a warm coat might take precedence over finer fabrics or decorative items. Children often accompanied adults on these trips, learning how to evaluate the quality of fabric, compare prices, and recognize what would best serve the household for years. In some households, families made clothing from animal hides, especially in areas where sheep, cows, or deer were plentiful. Hides were tanned and treated at home, or with the assistance of local craftsmen, then cut and sewn into jackets, pants, or shoes. These garments were exceptionally durable and could protect wearers from cold, wind, and rain. Making clothing from hides required careful skill. Children learned to prepare the material, stretch it properly, and sew pieces together using sinew or strong thread. These lessons were slow but thorough, ensuring that every family member could participate and that garments lasted through many seasons. Accessories like hats, gloves, and boots were often purchased from traders or towns. Boots were particularly important for both men and children, providing protection during fieldwork and riding. Shoes and boots were frequently repaired multiple times before replacement was necessary. Leather patches, soles, and stitching extended the life of these essential items. Hats were equally practical, shielding faces and necks from sun, wind, and rain. Children learned the value of caring for these items, understanding that proper use and repair reduced the need for frequent replacement. In addition to everyday wear, families also maintained special clothing for market visits, church, or community gatherings. These garments were simpler than modern, formal clothing, but were kept cleaner and better preserved than work clothing. Dresses, shirts, or coats for public events were mended, pressed, and stored carefully, teaching children the value of presentation and respect in social interactions. Such clothing also reinforced lessons about resource management. A well-kept garment could last for years, while careless use meant early replacement. Clothing care was an ongoing task, integrated into daily routines. Wash days were frequent, often involving boiling water, scrubbing garments by hand, and careful drying. Stains and wear were addressed promptly, and children helped with these chores from an early age. Learning how to wash, mend, and preserve clothing taught responsibility, patience, and an understanding of the value of materials. It also reinforced broader lessons in household management, planning, and the connection between care and durability. Seasonal needs influenced clothing as well. Winter required heavier garments, layered for warmth, and often reinforced with extra fabric or fur. Summer clothing was lighter but still durable, protecting against the sun and dust while allowing freedom of movement for outdoor work. Children learned to dress appropriately for both work and weather, observing elders and gradually assuming responsibility for their own clothing choices. Over time, they could mend their garments independently, adapt pieces to different seasons, and even assist younger siblings. Some families also engaged in small-scale weaving or spinning at home, producing thread from wool or flax that could be made into garments. These processes were slow but essential in remote areas, particularly where purchasing fabric was difficult. Spinning, weaving, and sewing became intertwined, creating a household economy based on self-sufficiency and skill. Children participated, learning to produce functional items from raw materials and understanding the full journey from fiber to finished garment. In more populated areas, traveling salesmen or general stores provided ready-made garments, sometimes including cotton shirts or coats or boots. These purchases were infrequent and planned carefully, often timed with seasonal markets or trips to town. Families compared quality, durability, and price, learning to make choices that balanced immediate needs with long-term use. Children learned to recognize good construction, proper stitching, and material quality, gaining practical judgment that would serve them in future household management. Even as families acquired some clothing from traders or markets, the majority was produced and maintained at home. The combination of homemade, traded, and purchased items created a flexible wardrobe capable of sustaining daily life. Each garment carried lessons in care, repair, and value, and children grew up understanding that clothing was not simply decoration, but an essential tool for work, protection, and social presence. In this way, the process of acquiring and maintaining clothing became a microcosm of Wild West life. Planning, careful use of resources, skill in making and mending, and practical education were central. Children learned not only how to dress themselves and care for their garments, but also lessons in patience, foresight, and responsibility. Clothing was a tangible reflection of household management, labor, and the steady rhythm of life. As children grew into teenagers, they increasingly took responsibility for the clothing of themselves and their younger siblings. In many households, This responsibility was considered both practical and educational. Girls often learned to sew complete garments, patch worn clothes, and manage clothing storage, while boys learned to repair boots, mend leather work, and sometimes even assist with heavier sewing projects. This gradual assumption of responsibility allowed parents to focus on broader household management and work while ensuring that children acquired essential skills for independent life. Market trips played a central role in this education. Teenagers accompanied parents to towns or trading posts, observing the careful evaluation of fabrics, garments, and other materials. They learned to compare prices, judge quality, and prioritize purchases based on household needs and available resources. Money was limited, so every coin spent was measured against necessity and durability. Teenagers learned that purchasing clothing required foresight. A sturdy coat or well-made boots could last for years, while poorly constructed items would quickly need replacement. Through repeated exposure, they internalized practical judgment and financial responsibility. In many cases, teenagers also produced items for sale or barter. Girls might weave cloth or knit socks to trade for sugar or other necessities, while boys might repair tools, craft leather goods, or tend small livestock sold for income. These activities reinforced the connection between labor, skill, and the value of goods. Children learned that clothing, like other household needs, required effort, planning, and attention to detail. By contributing to both production and maintenance, they developed independence, competence, and a sense of accountability. Seasonal changes further structured these responsibilities. In winter, heavier garments were mended, layered, and sometimes supplemented with fur or extra lining to withstand cold temperatures. In summer, lighter garments were washed frequently, repaired promptly, and stored carefully to prevent damage. Children and teenagers learned to anticipate seasonal needs, preparing clothing well in advance and adjusting care to the weather. These routines instilled foresight, organization, and a steady approach to household management. Even in households that were isolated, children received practical education in clothing care and acquisition. Families produced much of their own fabric through spinning and weaving or used hides from livestock. Sewing, patching, and mending became daily practice, building skill and confidence over time. Teens often assumed leadership roles in these tasks, supervising younger siblings and ensuring that the household maintained a functional wardrobe throughout the year. Through this steady rhythm of work and instruction, children learned self-reliance and resourcefulness, essential traits for life in the West. Clothing also played a role in social life. Families prepared special garments for church, markets, or community gatherings. Teenagers were expected to help maintain these items in good condition, washing, mending, and pressing them as needed. They observed that clothing signaled respect and careful management, teaching that appearance reflected both effort and household organization. These lessons extended beyond mere practicality, encouraging responsibility, diligence, and attention to detail. In essence, raising children in the West involved a careful balance of work, observation, and practical education. From early childhood through adolescence, boys and girls were gradually introduced to essential skills that allowed them to participate fully in household management, economic activity, and community life. Tasks related to clothing, from making and mending to acquiring and maintaining garments, were deeply intertwined with lessons in patience, planning, and self-reliance. Children learned not only to care for themselves, but also to support siblings, contribute to household stability, and develop confidence in their abilities. Families in the West relied on a mix of homemade clothing, traded or purchased goods, and careful maintenance to meet the demands of daily life. Markets, trading posts, and neighboring communities provided access to fabric, boots, and specialized items, while home production ensured durability and self-sufficiency. Children and teenagers learned to navigate these resources with attention, prudence, and foresight. By the time they reached adulthood, they were prepared to manage both clothing and broader household needs independently, continuing the practical lessons they had learned throughout childhood. In summary, people in the Wild West raised children by integrating education into daily work, teaching practical skills like clothing production, maintenance, and acquisition from a young age. Children gradually assumed responsibility, learning through observation, repetition, and participation. Markets and trading posts provided access to necessary goods, while homemade clothing ensured durability and skill development. Seasonal planning, careful repair, and resource management reinforced lessons in foresight, patience, and self-reliance. By combining labor, instruction, and gradual responsibility, families prepared children to thrive in challenging and often unpredictable environments, ensuring that each generation could maintain the household and participate fully in community life. Thanks for watching this calm history exploration of how people raise families in the Wild West. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe for more relaxing history videos, and don't forget to like and share so others can enjoy the journey through time. Your support helps keep these stories alive and accessible.